Okay, welcome back for part 2 of New Global Situations. Let's just delve right in. We've been talking about the adaptations, global adaptations to the market revolution, to this explosion. And this is a typical map. You can look at, this is, if you open up a map, you said world map, Google it. This is kind of the thing you're going to get up. On the left side, you're going to have the United States, North America, South America, and then you're going to have Europe, Africa, et cetera, on the right-hand side. We've spoken and focused a lot on this, on the left side of this particular deal. And that sort of part, I want to know about the Qing Empire. I want to know about China. I want to know about Japan. I want to know what's going on over on that side of the world, because it seems like we've done a lot of focus on the left side of this map. What about the right side? Well, I want to give you, again, keep you in mind, or remind you, to remind you what was the typical mindset in Japan and China during this time. When I say China, I mean what is considered modern day China, although it's had many different names getting up to the point where it was then labeled China. They had a very much of an isolationist, keep people out. We don't need you. Europeans were pushed out of the country, sort of like putting up big walls around the entire country, particularly in the China region, but also within Japan. Japan did the same thing during the Shogun times. They wanted to cling to their traditional values, their traditional beliefs. They did not want Christian influence. They were going to stay tight with their Shinto and their Buddhism and their Confucianism, Taoism. That's what they wanted to hang on to. And they didn't want the outside world to come in and pollute them with other ideas and other products and things like that. And that sort of gave them this idea that, again, that they are a little bit more superior. They're more of the center of the universe, center of the world. And they don't need anything from the outside. They don't need these newfangled products and things like that. But they still allowed a very minimal amount of trade. It was just very, very, very controlled. So for instance, Japan only had one port in Nagasaki that was allowed trade. The rest of it was closed. So how did they react? What did they do? They're in the situation. Europe is going crazy. They're just frantic to find new products, new trade, new markets, and they see all these people in China and Japan, and they're like, those are customers. They have money. So how did they respond? Well, up until the 1840s, Europe really had two focuses. The foci? No, foci. That's circles. That's math. Never mind. They had two focuses, and one was that Atlantic focus. They really were focused on trade with the United States, back and forth, that type of thing. They also had a focus in that Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean. Those were the areas of their concern. But in the 1840s, 1850s, there was a sort of a turn as India becomes more and more under the control of Britain, and Britain has now this foothold halfway to the Far East. It's looking to the Pacific. It wants to look at, well, what markets are out here? It already had sort of developed and grown in Australia, but China, Japan, all of the Southeast Asian areas, Vietnam, those places, it was starting to look at much, much more closely, which sort of makes sense because the Pacific Ocean is huge. Not only was it Europe that started looking there, but by 1840s, America had reached across the massive expanse from the little 13 colonies. They had made its way all the way over into California. They had acquired, and I'll show this one here. Here's a map. This is a map that was drawn in about 1856. I put the names on there so you get an idea of where everything is. Don't worry too much about the little deals. We're going to zoom in. So let's zoom in first on the United States. So by this time, Oregon has now been made part of the United States. And we have these little wars, Mexican wars, that we end up acquiring California all the way down to San Diego, and we're starting to populate cities like San Francisco and things like that along the coast. It's becoming much more clear. By 1850, California becomes a state. So that's how fast this is, how fast things are moving towards the west. The United States realizes that it has two sides exposed. To only focus and protect one side is crazy. What about this side? What if someone comes in this way to invade? You got to protect both sides. So it tries to and encourages this settling, this development of the West Coast. And as part of that, they end up looking towards even further west, across the Pacific. And I'm going to go back. Hold on a minute. I'm going to go back a little bit. I'm going to go back here. If you're looking at this map, and you're looking at the United States, there is sort of a center point. There is this kind of a hub, the spoke of the Pacific wheel, so to speak. And it is going to be very important. It's called the Sandwich Islands. It will, in years to come, it will become Hawaii. But right now, at this time, it was called the Sandwich Islands. And all of those red lines, the yellow lines, these are all steamship routes. And the person of this map has even written in how long it takes to get from one spot to another spot in this map. But this becomes sort of like a hub of the Pacific. And so people come here, supply, and go on to further west. Further west. Let's take a look for a minute at the Southeast Asia. How is Europe going to get there? Well, Europe really only has a couple ways to get there. Either it can go all the way underneath Australia and back up and get into the Pacific, or it can go through these particular straits in Southeast Asia. So would it not make sense, if they're going to be traveling through here, to have these be friendly waters? Meaning they're going to start populating, settling, building ports along these routes. And they do. So Britain, probably the biggest port, biggest area is down at the bottom of that brown and orange little finger that comes down. That becomes Singapore. And that's in 1819. They start developing that. That becomes its own independent country, its own region. But Britain is going to be sort of like the patron of that particular region. Saigon, up in that green part, northern green part of Vietnam, that's going to be settled by the French. The Philippines, well, the Philippines had been settled by the Spanish in about 1565. But they're still there. They still have some sort of influence in the Philippine Islands. And then, of course, all that orange, look at all that orange. All the orange is Dutch. And the Dutch are buddy-buddies with the English in many cases. Not in all, but in many cases. And so between 1812 on, the Dutch just populate those spice islands, those rich spice islands. And so now Europe has a nice clear path to get into the western part of the Pacific Ocean. So how does Europe open the door to China? Well, I'll tell you. China has something that the British want. They have tea. And as stereotypical as it is, the British do love their tea. So they want more and more. So what does China want in exchange for its tea? Well, China wants silver. The problem with that is that silver is pretty hard to come by, and Britain only has a limited supply. So the British folk, going back to that, here's our situation. We're running out of silver. What are we going to do? So they have a problem. They need the tea. They need something to go over and purchase the tea to keep their people happy. So what are they going to do? Well, they need to find something to substitute silver with. Now remember when I said that markets are going to have to find ways of access? If I'm a marketer and I can't pay in silver anymore, or I'm not collecting tea back and forth because I don't have any silver to buy with, then I need to come up with another way to get my silver or to get my tea. So what are the British going to do? They're going to use opium instead. Now, tobacco had been used in China for since like the 1700s. As it progressed and time went on, it sort of became a practice to mix the tobacco with opiates, and that was kind of a common practice by the 18th century. But here in the 19th century, to have Britain pouring opium, pure opium, into Chinese ports was not a good thing to the Chinese. And if you want to know where is the largest production of opium at this time, it's in British-controlled India. Ah, what a quinky-dink. The British say, well, we got India, we got all these crops, we'll use that, and we'll make them addicted to opium, and once they're addicted, they're going to buy our product. They're going to come get our product. And what are we going to pay them with? More opium. So they end up with this lovely, very ethical, that's sarcastic, very ethical. My wife keeps saying I need to tell you people when I'm being sarcastic. I'm being sarcastic. That was not ethical. This exchange for tea. And of course, I'm sure there were other products as well. So China sort of like fights back. It says, oh, no, you don't, and slams the door shut, puts all these laws in place to keep the British, the French out of China and to keep the opium away from their people. And so in 1841 to 1842, and then again later on, you have what is called the Opium Wars. And this is just this fighting back and forth between primarily British, but also a little bit of French, fighting the Chinese to get access to these markets. Again, what's driving this? Well, Machiavelli says it's the same passions as always have been there. What's driving the British and the French to go over and put opium into people's bodies so that they can get their product? Greed, selfishness. Those are the passions that are holding it. They want their money. So here are some of they're not really wars. They're more like just harassment. Here are the lines. They come up and they fight in southern, kind of harass with their navies, the coastal regions of South China. They work their way into northern China as well. The capital is up near the top, near Beijing, and so they're kind of pelting and throwing rocks, so to speak, at these areas, making it very difficult and upsetting not only the people, but creating animosity and strife within the country. And the powers that be in the Qing Empire are going to have to respond. They have to respond either allow their people to be messed with or to punch back, so to speak. But as this goes on and on and on, the Chinese are beginning to make treaties. They'll say, all right, just stop pelting us, we'll let you come in and do this. Mind you, this is bullying, really. So by 1842, Shanghai, Fuzhou, Hong Kong are all now under what they call treaty. They're called treaty ports. And the treaty is this sort of like agreement between the country who's going to port there, mostly British, and the government of the Qing Empire. The problem is that these particular treaties, they weren't very two-way. They weren't beneficial on both sides. They were almost completely beneficial to the British, to the French, to the other people who were trying to go over and take advantage of this moment and from Europe. And so they would create what they call these extraterritoriality clauses. And extraterritoriality clauses basically said that wherever we are in port, Hong Kong, Shanghai, these regions are no longer under Qing dynasty law. Anybody found guilty, anybody who is doing business, anybody who is operating in this particular region, these ports, they are under British law or French law. And the Chinese government cannot prosecute or do anything to these people. Not only that, but as these treaty ports proliferated, the people who are working with the British or with these French, the dock workers, the people who are going to receive the British European product and exchange it for some Chinese product, tea or whatever, these folks end up becoming protected. So the Chinese at the port can actually work against its own government. And as this moves on, as we move into the 1800s, later in the 1800s, this, along with many other things, is going to create a lot of division, a lot of animosity between the Chinese people. There are going to be divisions and strife, and they're going to end up with a major civil war moving into the latter part of the 1800s. So, lots of going on in this area. But as you notice, look where the ports are. Along the coasts, and then starting at about 1850s, moving in the 1860s, they end up moving into the river systems and start going inland. There is one significant moment, and that is as a reaction to the Second Opium War, which came later. French and British went up into this area here, into Tianjin, which is in that northern part near Beijing. You see Korea, and you see that little bay area. Well, Beijing's right there. Tianjin is close. That's like the port area, and then there's a road that runs from there to Beijing. So the French and the British end up going into that particular area eventually in 1862, and they burn the Emperor's Summer Palace. They burn it just tear it up. And at this point, even though this is not open war, there's not major battles and armies fighting side by side at this moment. It's more of just a way to slap the face of the Chinese, to shame them. The Chinese realize at this point that they must adapt somehow to this new presence, this European presence. They got to do something, whether it be complete all-out war against them, which doesn't seem likely, or they have to figure out some way to go over and work within this system. But that's not all. Europe is not the only one that gets to play nice with the people over in the Far East. No! Commodore Matthew Perry gets in his steam-driven warships and traverses the Pacific Ocean. And even though Japan had this closed-door policy, you only go to Nagasaki if you want to trade, Perry decides, forget that noise, and he drives his little armada of warships right into Tokyo Bay, the headquarters of the major shogun and all of the rulers of that time. Now, the Japanese kind of react a little bit differently. They decide, rather than fighting back immediately, there's a curiosity about them. There's something that is in the back of their head going, how might this help us? Is it possible this is a good thing? So even though there's a little bit of distancing still, they actually receive Perry. They receive the United States. And they start looking to study these new engines, these steam-powered paddle boat warships. It fascinates them. And they're looking at these new industries, new inventions, as a way of determining where do they want their nation, their country, to go. What is this piece, this marketing industrial revolution, what does this piece signify as far as where they're going to go next? And that's where Japan is going to have some significant advancement. You can just see the two different pictures. The one on the right is sort of the onset. This is Matthew Perry's steamships coming in to the port. Later, you have a Japanese artist who is kind of giving a little bit different rendition of this, the stormy seas. There is a bit of pushback against the Matthew Perrys. It wasn't all the American pride, dun, dun, da, da, kind of going into port. That was a very American sort of arrogance. From the Japanese side, there was precaution, although there was allowance, and there was a sense of storminess at times. You can see this is a picture of a Japanese diagram of Perry's war-driven or steam-driven warships. It was their way of trying to figure out how they might create these things. This is around 1853 or so. So you have various people groups around the world, whether it be the Islamic world, whether it be Africa, whether it be Southeast Asia, whether it be China, whether it be Japan. These people are starting to respond and react. The world is too small now. The industry has bled over into all continents everywhere, and these continents, these people, have to respond. Some are going to fight against it. Some are going to try to glean from it what they can. Others are going to try to assimilate, try to be part of this change that is there in their minds sort of inevitable and hopefully beneficial to their people. But all that is coming up in the future. The next set of videos, the next area we're going to look at is we're going to go back to Europe. Remember we were talking about all that craziness, all those broken up little pieces of kingdoms and duchies? Well, it's time for them to get together and make themselves one. So we're going to look at the unification of Italy and the unification of Germany next week. So see you then, and we'll be back in 1 week's time. Bye.